tonight at 10, for the first time since the start of the pandemic, the UK records more than 100,000 new cases of coronavirus in one day. It's the highest number of cases since mass testing began, as infections have stayed at record levels in recent days. Despite that, the latest evidence from several studies suggests that fewer people are going to hospital with the new variant Omicron.
I don't think I've ever known a time during this whole pandemic when data was being scrutinised so carefully on a day-to-day basis, where there's so much uncertainty and yet big decisions have to be made.
In Wales and Northern Ireland, extra COVID measures are announced, including the rule of 6 in hospitality venues. We'll have the latest analysis on the threat posed by the Omicron variant. Also tonight, nearly a week after the typhoon in the Philippines, we report from one of the worst affected areas.
You can see up there on the roof, it's been completely torn off like a can of sardines. 90% of the buildings here have been damaged.
And is comedy in danger of being cancelled because of sensitivity over controversial subjects? We'll have a special report.
Coming up in sport on the BBC News Channel 3, all Premier League ties in the quarter-finals of the EFL Cup tonight, with Tottenham and West Ham looking to reach the last four.
Good evening. For the first time since the start of the pandemic, nearly 2 years ago, the UK has recorded more than 100,000 new cases of coronavirus in a 24-hour period. Despite that high figure, the latest evidence from several studies suggests that fewer people are going to hospital with the new variant Omicron. But experts say they need more evidence before they can be certain. Now, during the day, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, announced that the quarantine period in England for people who test positive is to be cut from 10 to 7 days, and that is from today. The condition is that people will need 2 negative test results on day 6 and day 7, and that those tests must be taken 24 hours apart. And it's hoped that this will give more flexibility over the Christmas period, as well as easing pressure on the economy, with staffing levels badly affected in so many areas. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, has the latest.
Another record day for COVID cases and for booster jabs. But as the Omicron wave surges, at last some positive early evidence from 3 separate studies, all indicating it poses less of a threat than the Delta variant. Research by Imperial College London found around a 40% reduction in the risk of being admitted to hospital for a night or more compared to Delta. A Scottish study suggested there was a 65% lower risk of being hospitalised with Omicron, but it was based on only a few cases. While in South Africa, Omicron patients were thought to be around 75% less likely to need hospital treatment. Rather than Omicron being intrinsically milder, scientists think this is partly due to the build-up of immunity from previous infections and vaccination, but it is still good news.
These are very encouraging signs indeed. And it does mean that the models that have been presented to us and presented to the government, which have largely been based on assuming rather pessimistically that Omicron was of the same severity as Delta, I'm sure are being revised very rapidly at the moment.
The festive getaway has begun, and there was an early Christmas present for many who thought they'd be isolating on the 25th. After the rules in England cut the quarantine period from 10 to 7 days. Lee is already anticipating heading home. His lateral flow on day 6 was negative this morning. If tomorrow's is clear, he's free.
Well, it saved Christmas for me. I thought I was kind of here till midnight on Boxing Day in self-isolation, so I can go back to the family home now and see my young daughter.
People ending isolation early are urged to be cautious and not visit crowded or poorly places, because even after a week, it's still possible to be carrying the virus and it not show up on lateral flow tests. More than 51 million people aged over 12 in the UK have had at least one COVID vaccine, nearly 31 million 3 doses. Now, all 16 and 17-year-olds will be eligible for a booster, and those in line for first jabs is to get even younger. In the United States and several European countries, all 5 to 11-year-olds are being offered COVID jabs. In Texas, these therapy dogs provided a useful distraction. Here, only 5 to 11s in at-risk groups will be eligible for now. They'll get 2 shots 8 weeks apart, each one a third of the adult dose.
We know these vaccines are effective at preventing serious disease. That's the one thing that they do reliably. And so it makes absolute sense that we offer those children that are at high risk the benefit of protection from vaccination now that the vaccine is available for the age group.
New treatments continue to be rolled out, such as antiviral pills like molnupiravir, which should keep many of the most vulnerable from falling seriously ill once infected. The concern is the huge number of cases, even if mostly milder, could still lead to a dangerous spike in hospital admissions next month. So the scale of the Omicron threat remains uncertain. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
We'll talk to Fergus in just a moment. Before that, let's have a look at the official data for the pandemic in the UK. And as we were saying, 106,122 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. The average over the past week is now 91,888 new cases every day. And the number of people in hospital with COVID is 8,008, the first time it's been more than 8,000 for a month. 140 deaths were recorded of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. 112 COVID-related deaths were recorded on average every day in the past week. And on the vaccinations, a record number of people now having their boosters yesterday, just under 1 million, bringing the average over the past week to more than 873,000 a day. And in total, nearly 31 million have had a booster. That is 53.6% of the population over the age of 12. So having looked at those figures, let's talk then to our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, who joins us now. Fergus, clearly a lot of interest in these studies that we mentioned earlier on. How do you read them?
Well, Huw, there are grounds tonight for some very cautious optimism. I put it no stronger than that. The data are preliminary. There's a lot more research needed, and yet so much is riding on it. Decisions that will affect people's lives, the economy, the NHS. But these 3 studies all point in the same positive direction, that Omicron is going to cause milder infection for most than Delta. Now, that doesn't mean to say that this is a mild virus, because if you're unvaccinated, then you run a really big risk because it's so contagious. And they are the people who are tending to fill up the beds, especially in intensive care, but a lot of protection from vaccination. UK-wide, the hospital numbers have been fairly flat, but in London, which saw the first of the Omicron wave, they had 300 hospital COVID admissions yesterday, the highest number since early February, but still a third of what we saw in January. But the worst of the Omicron wave won't be felt until next month, when we're again in deep midwinter.
Fergus, many thanks again for the latest analysis there. Fergus Walsh, our medical editor. In Wales, the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, said they were facing a very serious situation as he announced a series of new restrictions to take effect from Boxing Day. The rule of 6 will be applied again, meaning that groups no larger than 6 people can meet in pubs and restaurants and cinemas. Events will be limited to 50 people outdoors or 30 indoors. Mr Drakeford said the decision was in response to the sharp rise in cases of the Omicron variant. Our Wales correspondent, Hywel Griffith, has more details.
Be bold or tread carefully. Once again, the Welsh Government has chosen the most careful path through the pandemic, raising the alert level as a precaution before really knowing where Omicron will lead us. From Boxing Day, there are limits on how many people can meet to eat, drink or go to the cinema. Families are advised, but not bound by law, to limit how much they mix in each other's homes.
Yeah, I've heard that one
For
before.
the Parsons family, it all feels last minute, giving people dilemmas over who to choose.
Our friends in the local pub, they like to gather, you know, and so everybody's in the WhatsApp group saying, you know, oh, this is really going to affect everyone.
If they were going to do something, they should have given people more notice than just like a couple of days before Christmas. And I don't really think people are going to listen to the recommendations. Last Christmas gave us all similar heartbreaking decisions to make. Who would be in your bubble? Who would be left out in the cold? This year, well, there's no last-minute lockdown, but there's the same uneasy sense that the rules are changing day by day.
Today's announcement is the third in Wales in less than a week, and even more measures could follow.
If we need to do more, the Welsh Government will not stand back. We never have. These are difficult decisions. They're not always popular decisions. But if the evidence says to us that more has to be done to prevent unnecessary deaths and avoidable harm, then that is what we will do.
It's a warning which stirs strong feelings in the hospitality industry. Nick runs 5 pubs. Going back to the rule of 6 with table service and mandatory masks leaves him with one question.
We just don't understand why. There's no evidence about transmission of the virus within hospitality. In fact, we're amongst the safest sectors that you can find.
Which direction Wales takes next feels very uncertain. For now, the focus is just on getting to the new year. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Cardiff.
New restrictions were also announced in Northern Ireland today. Nightclubs will close from Boxing Day, 26th of December, and from the 27th, people will have to remain seated in hospitality venues with a limit of 6 people at each table. And people will be advised to limit meeting inside private homes to 3 households. Our correspondent Chris Page has the latest there.
This Christmas in Belfast, many much-missed winter traditions have returned. But the pandemic is still here for another season. The devolved government has decided Omicron requires a response.
These are very difficult decisions for ministers to make. You're trying to get a balance between keeping the pressure off our health service, you're trying to protect the public, you're trying to keep people in work, you're trying to mind people's mental health. So these are finely balanced decisions. They're not easy to take, I have to say, but we think that this is our best chance.
The measures agreed by ministers here at Stormont will mainly affect eating out, other types of socialising and live music. From Boxing Day, nightclubs will have to close and standing won't be allowed at indoor events like concerts. On Monday, the new rules for pubs and restaurants will take effect. The hospitality industry says it doesn't have much to celebrate during the festivities that haven't really happened. This business owner is closing one of his restaurants this week because of cancelled bookings and the spread of the virus. He says the sector deserves more help.
This one small restaurant in the middle of Belfast would collect and hand over £350,000 per year to the government, and we do that every year. We've done it for the last 17 years. That's a lot of money. To date, we've received £20,000 in help from the government. I don't think that's a fair deal.
People were only just getting used to going out to clubs and gigs again, but there's new uncertainty about that too. Events promoters are worried the live scene here might not recover.
I think that you're looking at a pretty long-term effect of these restrictions and closures on business, and it's a huge concern. Belfast is in a relatively vulnerable position for touring acts anyway, because it's a relatively small market.
Unpredictability has become routine. But Northern Ireland isn't returning to the standstill of lockdown. Whether more severe restrictions will be brought in here will depend on how much illness Omicron causes and how many people get their booster jabs. Chris Page, BBC News, Belfast.
So we have new restrictions coming in after Christmas in Scotland, in Wales and in Northern Ireland. But what about England? Our political correspondent Jonathan Blake is at Westminster. What does that look like, Jonathan?
Well, Huw, the government is holding firm tonight. I'm told there is no change in the view in Downing Street, that the data just isn't there yet to justify any new restrictions. Of course, the Prime Minister has confirmed there won't be any further measures brought in before Christmas, and we are not expecting Downing Street to make any announcements before Christmas about what might be brought in afterwards. So that gives some certainty for the next few days at least. But there's clearly a contrast tonight, isn't there, between England and the rest of the UK. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, people have a clear idea of what is going to happen beyond Boxing Day, and the Welsh Labour First Minister Mark Drakeford accusing the UK government of being in a state of paralysis. If it does decide to act, MPs will be brought back here to Westminster to approve any new measures, and those studies we were hearing about tentatively suggesting that Omicron may be milder than previous variants will be seized upon by Conservative MPs as vindication of their view that new measures are not needed.
Jonathan, many thanks again for the latest there. Jonathan Blake at Westminster. Let's have a look then at some of the other COVID developments around the world today. The World Health Organization says there should be enough vaccines for all adults globally by the end of March, but they say that no country can boost its way out of the pandemic, warning that wealthy countries are rushing to give booster jabs at the expense of poorer nations trying to provide initial vaccinations. France has opened COVID vaccinations to children aged between 5 and 11 today. The French government warned that daily COVID infections could exceed 100,000 there by the end of the month, with the Omicron variant becoming the dominant one. And in Austria, they're introducing new restrictions, including a 10 p.m. closing time in the hospitality sector to slow the spread of Omicron after Christmas. They also classified Britain, Denmark, the Netherlands and Norway as risk areas, meaning that arrivals from those countries must quarantine if they've not had a booster jab. Let's turn to some of the day's other news, because it's nearly a week since the Philippines was struck by a typhoon, the strongest this year. At least 375 people lost their lives and hundreds of thousands have been left without shelter. The Red Cross says there is carnage, to quote them, in many areas, with no power, no communications and very little water. One of the worst affected areas was the popular tourist island of Siargao. And from there, our correspondent Howard Johnson sent this report.
Devastation as far as the eye can see. Super Typhoon Rai first made landfall here last Thursday, packing winds in excess of 150 miles an hour and dumping huge quantities of rainfall. This dramatic footage captured the moment a new sports hall, doubling as an evacuation centre, was torn to shreds.
There was no protection. There was no roof. There was no wall. We was literally lying there, down there, and the entire nature force was like bashing on us with full power, with full force. We had nothing there.
The governor of the island estimates that 90% of buildings have been damaged.
This is my house.
This man shows me to where his home and convenience store once stood.
I'm scared because my children is no more food, and then my house is broken for the typhoon. I don't know. I'm going to start again my store and my my home.
This is a scene that we have seen many times. The roof has been ripped off like a can of sardines. The metal has been torn back. Glass is smashed up there, and you can see the roof in tatters down here. And so many people are without shelter at the moment, and people here are calling for more support. They need more aid, they need more water, more food, and at the moment the supplies are coming through, but they're not getting through quickly enough. Prices for filtered bottled water have doubled in the last week, forcing some to find other sources. This family are drawing water from an old well, but it isn't clean. Diarrhea cases are on the rise here.
It's bad for the stomach, sir, but we don't have choice. We need to drink. We don't have safety water for drink.
At the island's badly damaged airport, aid is getting through, but in limited quantities. Outside, residents have been waiting for up to 3 days for a flight off the island. It's leading to a sense of panic.
There's nothing. There's no system. We have to figure out ourselves. That's it. The real pandemic is not having a system. Sorry.
As night falls, a newly arrived Philippine Red Cross team help islanders to speak with loved ones using their satellite phone. Help is on hand here, but there needs to be a lot more. Howard Johnson, BBC News, Siargao Island.
Millions of people will be playing video games over the Christmas period, and for many, it's just an enjoyable way of spending time online with friends. But for some, it can become an addiction, one that puts a terrible strain on family life. And BBC News has gained access to the UK's only treatment facility for addiction to video games. Our technology correspondent Mark Chislak has more.
Having people around, you do feel a degree of embarrassment sometimes for the duration of the visit. He'll just be upstairs gaming all the time and he'll be shouting and cursing.
Stephen and Louise are describing life with their 16-year-old son who suffers from gaming disorder. Until quite recently in the UK, they'd have had to have sought help privately, but now the NHS has created a specialist clinic that uses therapy to help sufferers.
Hello, thank you for calling National Centre for Gaming Disorder.
Based in West London, it's part of the National Centre for Behavioural Addictions. Many families see the facility as a lifeline.
It's really devastating for families. Parents are very, very worried. Sometimes there, can cause real arguments. So for parents trying to sort of get people to stop gaming, they may have done things like turning off the Wi-Fi. That can cause really massive arguments, threatening behaviour, quite extreme in some cases.
This is the first time TV cameras have been allowed into this facility. So far, 300 patients have walked through the doors, with many referred by parents who are desperate for help.
So often people are really struggling in managing their emotions, so they can struggle with anger, anxiety and low mood. Often they also experience physical symptoms in terms of loss of sleep, and that's often because people will be gaming at night to connect with gamers abroad.
Yeah, so we need to think about the groups that we're going to start in the new year.
This is the only NHS clinic in the UK treating gaming disorder. Its patients are spread out across England and Wales and are often treated via video chat. Therapists here reiterate that this condition is in fact rare, and a recent Oxford University report concluded that gaming has many benefits for people's mental health and well-being, especially helping many get through the pandemic. However, for Stephen and Louise, who are only at the start of their son's treatment programme, the clinic has already helped them cope better.
What was most helpful for us is talking to other parents. They made a special support group for parents who have the same gaming needs or addiction, whatever you want to call it. We meet once a fortnight on Zoom to discuss how we're doing.
The greatest thing about that, in terms of benefit, is to realise that you're not alone. There's loads of other people up and down the country and all across the world that are going through the exact same situation.
What do you think the future looks like for your son, and what do you think the future looks like for you as a family?
I feel optimistic because on Facebook I follow a lot of people who are very like our son, but they're adults now. And I follow them because they're hugely insightful, but also it really helps me feel he will find his way.
Mark Chislak, BBC News.
Dame Maureen Lipman, one of Britain's most distinguished actors, says that the fear of being cancelled has left comedy on the verge of being wiped out, with comedians staying away from controversial subjects for fear of not being booked again. And that fear is not just evident among comedians. A poll shared with BBC News suggests that more than half of those surveyed stopped themselves from expressing their views for fear of getting a negative reaction. Our culture editor, Katie Razzle, has been investigating.
I'm depressed and suicidal. Guess where I'm working?
It's stand-up comedy night in Manchester. New act Faison is telling jokes that some could find offensive.
I was working at Manchester Airport in aviation security. A depressed, suicidal Muslim at the airport.
But who decides what's funny and what will offend? And is this tension a reflection of what's happening in wider society too?
Comedians are very paranoid that they might word something the wrong way, and then that's out there forever, and then they're cancelled and they'll never gig again.
Is this your idea of a joke then?
Maureen Lipman, starring in Coronation Street right now, has a dramatic prediction.
I think it's a revolution.
Something has to be forbidden to make you really laugh, to make you really belly laugh. It's when you shouldn't be laughing. This cancel culture, this cancelling, this punishment, it's everywhere. Punishment. You know, an eye for an eye. You said that, therefore you must never work again. We are literally, we're on the cusp of wiping out comedy.
So, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but...
Comedian Russell Kane says comedy is in fact in rude health.
I was good at Dungeons and Dragons, so...
I don't think anyone's saying we can't be offended. No one's saying that. There's been a massive, much-needed shift in the conversation around gender, around men's attitudes to women, around consent, blah, blah, blah. The sort of ironic lad humour of, yeah, she's up for it, which at the time, I'm pretty sure, was delivered with irony by 99.9% of the people. But now, irony or not appropriate.
A poll suggests in normal life people are stopping themselves from saying what they really think on certain subjects for fear of being judged. 57% of those asked said they self-censor on topics including immigration and transgender rights, particularly if their opinions are seen as less politically correct. Perhaps it's obvious that they don't speak openly with people they've just met. Nearly half said they don't. But 40% keep views quiet at work, and nearly a third don't tell friends their real views on these subjects either.
I'm not worried about being judged. I'd rather just not say something because I don't think it's right. At the end of the day, making offensive remarks is bullying.
OK, Mr Brooke, could you tell me, last time you were weighed, what was your weight? £8 4 ounces?
What's happening on the comedy stage and in real life is a sign outdated views are being weeded out, or a worrying assault on free speech, depending on your perspective. Culture often leads the way on the big issues of our time, as we all navigate what we can say and what it's best not to. Katie Razzle, BBC News, Manchester.
That's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.